This is Scotty Reed with a Black Talk Radio News report. On this segment, I would like to issue a direct challenge to the conscious community, which is a part of the black community. And as you can see here is a tweet that came out about 3 hours ago on Twitter by Tariq Nasheed, who is showcased a lot in this system by the mainstream media. Now, he says that racism is everywhere in the form of systemic white supremacy, which dominates all areas of activity, and denial and deflection maintains it. Now, I talk about racism, but I talk about racism in a different context as my understanding has grown through reading and research, that racism is a tool of slavery, that the system that we really need to be worried about is the system of slavery. Again, I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of research. Not saying that I'm right about everything. I have issued corrections where I have found that I was in error. But it just boggles my mind that these researchers and these scholars in the conscious community never talk about the fact that slavery was never abolished at any point in United States history, at any point during colonial history. Slavery was never abolished. And these same scholars, not all of them, but some of them, have published articles in, let's say, The Atlantic. All right, The Atlantic, it used to be an abolitionist paper, but now, it's just pretty much another one of those mainstream papers, okay? They don't talk about slavery. They don't talk about abolitionists. And I've seen some of these black scholars publish articles talking about slavery was abolished, that Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery after the conclusion of the Civil War. When the 13th Amendment, the part of the supreme law of the land called the U.S. Constitution, makes clear that slavery was never abolished. I have replied to these people. I have asked them to start talking about slavery and abolitionism because, it just seems to me that you would think that that is the number one threat to black people. Now, I'm going to put out there right now that slavery don't just affect black people. It affects all people. If you go to a prison, you will find people of all different backgrounds, of all different colors, of all different religions, and they're all trapped in modern day slavery and human trafficking. I thought Ava DuVernay was going to open up some people's eyes. Yeah, the documentary could have been more clear about slavery, where a lot of the people who were featured in that film were talking about mass incarceration, which don't exist. If we want to talk about mass incarceration, you would assume that most people would be in prison. Whether you're talking about mass incarceration of black people, you would think that at least 30 million black people would be in prison if we had mass incarceration. We don't have mass incarceration. What we have is a continuation of slavery. And I just want to know, why is it that these scholars never talk about slavery never being abolished? For 5 years now, New Abolitionist Radio, which is a radio program that was conceptualized by the Black Talk Media Project, a North Carolina nonprofit, and we created New Abolitionist Radio to bring attention to the fact that slavery was never abolished. We just recently had our 5th year anniversary. It's a weekly program, and we even for 50 weeks one year went through every state constitution to identify the state constitutions that legalized slavery and human trafficking, because the language, while it may not be exactly like the 13th Amendment, it is similar language that provides for an exception clause. So I'm issuing a direct challenge to the so-called conscious community, because I don't see how you can call yourself conscious or put out there like you're more conscious than others, and you're not even conscious of the fact that the United States never abolished slavery and that it is still affecting people today. From my research, racism is a tool that was used to practice race-based slavery. Now, I found doing my research that the United States government actually passed laws against white supremacy and racism. They passed constitutional amendments. They passed laws like the Klan Act of 1871, which gave Ulysses S. Grant the tools he needed to destroy the Ku Klux Klan terrorist organization. And then it was reformatted, or I should say the United States in 1915 then started openly supporting white supremacist terrorist organizations, and it continues to this day. All right. But racism has always been a tool to put people into slavery. It's just now in this modern period of enslavement, it affects all people and not just black people. I mean, this is documented history. Shout out to Brother Lee Wood, who in 1971 published the book Prison Slavery. It's no longer in print, but you may be able to find, I think you can go to Google and you can find some cash copies of it and you can get some excerpts from it. But Mr. Wood is still alive today, but not many people know his name. And he published that groundbreaking book in 1971 called Prison Slavery, pointing to the 13th Amendment and telling the people that slavery was never abolished. When is the conscious community going to become abolitionists and work towards the abolishment of slavery and finish the job of many of these famous black people that they will talk about, like Frederick Douglass, like Sojourner Truth, like Harriet Tubman? Well, the job has not been done, okay? Because Lincoln capitulated to the leaders of the former Confederate States of America and made an agreement with them to allow them to continue practicing slavery, but as punishment for crime, which I just made a video about that yesterday that I'll play for you at the end of my commentary. So what happened after the passage of the 13th Amendment? Well, then you had the convict leasing program where the states and the federal government would lease prisoners back to the plantations, back to these industries like the mining industry, like the railroad industry, to use prison slave labor. All right. So what did they do? What laws were passed after the passage and the ratification of the 13th Amendment? The black codes. Yeah, we'll hear about people who discuss racism, talk about the black codes, but what was the purpose of the black codes? To put black people back into slavery. Okay. So I'm issuing a direct challenge to the conscious community to stop talking about slavery in past tense and to stop not being able to see the forest through the trees. And that is slavery. That is the #1 issue facing our generation. This has been Scotty Reed with a Black Talk Radio News commentary. It is widely believed that slavery was abolished in the USA in 1865. However, evidence shows that slavery was never abolished. Slavery simply returned to its roots as punishment for crime. John Punch was the ancestor of 2 Nobel Prize winners, Barack Obama and Ralph Bunche. It is not clear, but John Punch was either an indentured servant or a chattel bond servant who ran away with 2 indentured servants. When all 3 were caught, the 2 indentured servants were given longer periods of indentured servitude. The Virginia's Governor's Council sentenced John Punch to a lifetime of slavery, a sentencing disparity. This is the first documented case of slavery being used as punishment for crime on the American continent. Today in the USA, slavery as punishment for crime is enshrined in the United States Constitution. Prison slave labor is used by federal and state governments and by major corporations across several industries. Private prisons for profit stocks are sold to the public, meaning Wall Street is back in the slave trade business. Join modern abolitionists to end modern slavery through prisons in a new abolitionist movement.